Good day, everybody. Today we'll be doing our grade 6 English lesson on subordinating conjunctions. And before we start, we're going to log on to aplusstudents.ca. Once we've logged on to aplusstudents.ca with our username as well as our password, and then we're going to select the subject of English Language Arts, grade 6, and then scroll down up until we get to the chapter of subordinating conjunction. All right. So our chapter is subordinating conjunction. Our subject is English language arts. Grade 6. And the lesson that we are going to be focusing on is to identify subordinating conjunctions. All right. So a subordinate, these different, you get different types of conjunctions, right? And the one that we're going to be focusing on is subordinating conjunction. All right. So a subordinating conjunction, right? It introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. And the dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of the sentence and it cannot stand on its own. And some of the common subordinating conjunctions, right, are words such as after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. All right, so once again, we have subordinating conjunctions. And remember, we said that there are different kinds of conjunctions. You're just going to have to know the difference between them, right? So we have subordinating conjunction, and a subordinating conjunction introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. And remember, there are different types of sentences, right? Or let's say, yeah, we have even a sentence or dependent clause as well as an independent clause. An independent clause can stand on its own, and usually to join clauses, if you want it to be a compound sentence, then we use a coordinating conjunction. Then we have a dependent clause, right? A dependent clause cannot stand on its own. It needs the assistance of an independent clause, right? But then we use a subordinating conjunction usually at the start of the dependent clause. And we see the subordinating conjunction, it introduces the independent clause within a complex sentence. And the dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of the sentence and it cannot stand on its own. And remember, the other part of the sentence is the independent clause. And some of the common subordinating conjunctions are words like after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, if. Those are subordinating conjunctions. All right. And if we look at a few examples, right, of where we can use subordinating conjunctions within a sentence, it says, I need to return this book before the library closes. And we can look over here at a few of the common subordinating conjunctions, right? In order to help us in identifying what the subordinating conjunction is within that sentence. It says, I need to return this book before the library closes. And if we were to identify our if we were to identify our coordinating conjunction within that sentence, and then we would say it is before. So before is our coordinating conjunction. All right, the next one says, unless it's cloudy tonight, we will see the full moon. So unless it's cloudy tonight, we will see the full moon. So we need to identify our subordinating conjunction within that sentence. All right, so our coordinate subordinating conjunction would then be unless, right? And it tells us about the other sentence. Let's look at the next one. It says, I was late this morning because I forgot to set my alarm. So I was late this morning because I forgot to set my alarm. We need to identify the subordinating conjunction within that sentence. All right, and if we were to identify a subordinating conjunction, then we would say it is because. Right? So that is our three subordinating conjunctions that we have identified, right? We said a subordinating conjunction, it introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence, right? And I think in our next lesson, we will basically go over the different types of sentences. I think we went over those sentences already. We have a simple sentence, a compound sentence, a complex sentence, right? And a dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of a sentence and it cannot stand on its own. It cannot stand alone, right? Which means that dependent, right? You need the independent clause in order to basically form a sentence. Because if you were to think of independent and dependent, right? So as a child, right, you are dependent on your parents because you need money, you need toiletries, you need literally all of those things. So, which means that you are dependent on your mom. You cannot do life without that, without your parent, right? But independent means that you stand on your own, you do things on your own, right? And that is also how we can portray that within a sentence. Independent sentences can stand on its own, whereas dependent sentences or clauses, they basically cannot stand on its own. So they need the assistance and the help of the independent clause. And once again, our subordinating conjunctions are words like after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. Those are our subordinating conjunctions, or more like the common subordinating conjunctions. And once again, it introduces the dependent clause within a complex sentence. All right, so now we're going to select the subordinating conjunction within these three sentences. The first one says, if we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird. So if we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird. We need to identify the subordinating conjunction within that sentence. If we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird. All right, and if we were to identify the subordinating conjunction, then it would be if we are lucky. So if is a subordinating conjunction, and it says if we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird. All right, and then the next one says because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. So because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. So we need to identify or to select the subordinating conjunction within that sentence. So because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. All right, and if we were to identify our subordinating conjunction within that sentence, we would say it is because. So because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. Right? So because is our subordinating conjunction within that sentence. All right, the next one says, would my paragraph be better if I cut out the sentence? So would my paragraph be better if I cut out the sentence? So we need to identify a subordinating conjunction, which is, would my paragraph be better if I cut out this sentence? All right, and if we were to identify our subordinating conjunction, then we would say this if. So would my paragraph be better if I cut out this sentence? All right, so now we're going on to our test, right? And before we go on to our test, we're going to just go over what a subordinating conjunction is, and then we're going on to our test. We said a subordinating conjunction introduces the dependent clause within a sentence or within a complex sentence, all right? And the dependent clause, it tells you about the other part of the sentence and it cannot stand on its own. And some of our common subordinating conjunctions are words like after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. All right. So now we're going to aplusstudents.ca. And we said our chapter is subordinating conjunctions. And the lesson that we are going to be focusing on is to identify subordinating conjunctions. And like our earlier example that we made, there we have before, unless, and because, which is our conjunctions that we had identified. All right. So once again, a subordinating conjunction introduces a dependent clause in a sentence, and the dependent clause tells you about the other part of a sentence and cannot stand on its own. And there we have a few of our subordinating conjunctions: after, because, before, as, while, until, since, unless, although, if. Now we're going to select the subordinating conjunction within a sentence. It says, this one: did you leave the cafeteria after I did? We need to select the subordinating conjunction. Did you leave the cafeteria after I did? All right, and if we were to select our subordinating conjunction, it says, did you leave the cafeteria after I did? And if we were to identify it, we would identify our subordinating conjunction as after. So after is our conjunction. It says, did you leave the cafeteria after I did? After is our conjunction. All right, the next one says, would you set the table while I prepare lunch? So, would you set the table while I prepare lunch? All right, and if we were to identify or select the coordinating conjunction, we would say it is while. So, while is our subordinating conjunction. Yes, and while is correct. So, well done. While is correct. All right, let's go to the next one and then we're going to our test. It says, if you like geography, so if you like geography, you will love Mrs. Lawson's class. So if you like geography, you will love Mrs. Lawson's class. All right, so if we were to choose our subordinating conjunction, we would say it is if. So if you like geography, you will love Mrs. Lawson's class. All right. So now we're going on to our test. All right, so we need to select the subordinating conjunction. It says Jenny ended her talk early since her audience looked drowsy. All right, and if we were to select our subordinating conjunction, either option one or option two, we would say it is since, which is option one. So since, which is option one. The next one says, we should go to the museum since we have a second pass. So we should go to the museum since we have a second pass. What is our subordinating conjunction within that sentence? Is it we should go to the museum since we have a second pass? So is it since in bold or is it go, which is in bold? Our subordinating conjunction. All right, and if we were to identify our subordinating conjunction within that sentence, whether it is either since or go, then we'll go with since. Right, so we go with since. All right. While Elizabeth was out, Sam left a package on her doorstep. All right, so we need to choose our correct option, whether it is while or someone. So we need to say if it is while or someone. While or someone, a subordinating conjunction. And if we were to choose the correct one, we will say it is while. So while Elizabeth was out, someone left a package on her doorstep. We need to select the subordinating conjunction. It says, if we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird. If we are lucky, we may glimpse a red bird. So our subordinating conjunction, right? Is it if within that sentence or we, option two, within that sentence? So option one or option two? So if we were to identify a subordinating conjunction, then we will go with if. So if we are lucky, we may glimpse a rare bird, not we. All right, it says Bruce was nervous, although there was no reason to worry. So is it although or is it there? Our subordinating conjunction. Though or there. And if we were to choose our subordinating conjunction, we will go with although, right? All right. All right, let's look at the next one. It says, I don't watch scary movies unless they are also a bit humorous. So this person wants to watch more like of comedy scary movies, more jokes than to be surprised. So we need to either choose unless or we choose they. So I don't watch scary movies unless they are also a bit humorous. All right. And if we were to choose the correct subordinating conjunction, then we will go with unless. And unless is correct. So is it because or is it contains? We need to select the code, the subordinating conjunction. Is it because or contains? Think of what we said is the common. So grass is green because it contains chlorophyll. And if we choose the correct one, we would say because. That is the reason why the grass is green. All right, so option one is correct. So we need to select the subordinated conjunction. Is it before? Because it's in bold, as well as should. So is it before or should? And if we were to select the subordinating conjunction within that sentence that says before we draw any conclusions, we should collect more evidence. All right. And if we were to choose the correct subordinated conjunction, we would go with before, right? Because before we draw any conclusions, we should collect money and more evidence. All right. Let's do two more. All right. So we would then choose unless. So unless we cooperate, we won't find your post. All right, and if we were to select our subordinating conjunctions within the sentence, we would go with because. So, because Scott was new, we encouraged him to sit at our table. So, because. All right, let's do one more. It says, would you sit the table while I prepare lunch? So, is it while in option one or is it would in option two? Would you sit the table while I prepare lunch? And if we were to choose our subordinating conjunction, we would go to while I prepare lunch, right? All right, so we said our subordinating conjunctions, it introduces the dependent clause, right? Within a complex sentence. And the dependent clause within a sentence, it tells you about the other part of a sentence, and dependent clause cannot stand on its own. Some common subordinating conjunctions are words like after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, although, and if. Those are the most common ones. All right, and if we were to choose, and we said these are our subordinating conjunctions, which is after, before, as, while, until, because, since, unless, though, and if. And those are subordinating conjunctions that introduces the dependent clause in a complex sentence. All right, so that is now the end of our lesson on subordinating conjunctions. Thank you very much for joining the class, and you should have a good evening further. Goodbye. All right. Goodbye.